Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending upon where in the world you are joining us from. Thanks so much for being here today. I'm so excited hosting this conversation. My name is Teresa Welsh. I'm a reporter with Devex, and we are here today on the International Day of Rural Women 2020 to have a conversation about the role that rural women play in agriculture and the food system. Women are obviously major contributors to agriculture and rural economies, and they do play a key role in our food system. But they also face a host of challenges, including restricted access to finance and land rights and gender based violence. COVID-19, of course, has further stressed all of these factors. Today, we'll be talking about how we can eliminate some of these barriers and be sure women have access to all the tools they need, not only to ensure food security for themselves and their families, but also market access and financing opportunities for a secure livelihood. Devex is excited to be hosting this event today in conjunction with IFAD to mark the International Day of Rural Women. We are also broadcasting this event as a official World Food Prize Week side event. So thanks so much for those of you that are tuning in. This is the first in a series of 3 events that we at Devex will be hosting with IFAD for the end of the year. So definitely keep an eye out for future invitations. On social, you can engage with us during this conversation. We are at Devex using the hashtag Devex event and hashtag invest in rural women. During this conversation, we welcome you to submit questions in the Q&A box, and we will be integrating those throughout. So please type your questions at any time during this conversation. Those can be directed to a particular panelist or for the general panel. We'll also be doing some audience polls throughout the event, and we encourage people to vote when those pop up on your screen. After the event, we'll be sharing a recording, and so if you have any colleagues that you want to share this with, you will be able to do so. Now I am excited to introduce Sabrina Elba, who has sent a special introduction on this International Day of Rural Women.
Hello everyone from Vancouver, Canada. I want to wish you all a happy International Day of Rural Women, and let me just say it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Sabrina Elba. I am a model, philanthropist, but most proudly a UN Goodwill Ambassador for IFAD. Look, I know if you're tuning into this event, it's because you care. You care about the welfare of 1.7 billion women and girls who live in rural areas around the world. The women who grow the world's food, the women who take care of our planet. These women do it all. Most of them do it all for their children while running a trading business and herding goats and chickens in the backyard. Seriously, these are the women who do the hard work, but with the least pay and the least respect. These women do not have political power or influence. They can't talk about their problems on social media. You know what? You probably have never even heard their voice. But these women are mothers, sisters, girls who have done nothing, absolutely nothing to deserve the dire predicament that they are now in due to climate change and COVID-19 shocks. They battle droughts, flooding, violence, hunger. But as you know, they can achieve incredible things if they just get investment and access to the basics, training, education, a loan, an opportunity to rise up and build a new life. I, like many of you out here, are very concerned for these women. I don't think I need to tell you that rising hunger, climate change, and COVID-19, it's all disrupting our planet like never before. An estimated 690 million people are hungry. That's an increase of 60 million over the past 5 years, according to the UN. Some experts predict that an additional 95 million people will be living in extreme poverty and hunger due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Sadly, it's poor female farmers and their families, those who produce an important share of the world's food and whose livelihoods depend on food and agriculture, that are among the most likely to experience hunger. It doesn't have to be this way. There is so much that can be done to help women in rural areas to grow more food and to move out of poverty. For the majority of women in the world, true empowerment still means economic empowerment. Through IFAD, governments are not just investing in sustainable agriculture and rural women, they are putting girls in school. They are helping kids eat better because yes, that's what happens when women make more money. It also helps prevent gender-based violence and levels the power dynamics. And these women I've spoken to them. They want these investments so they can build a better life. So I want to recognize and applaud the leading governments who have been stepping up for rural women through IFAD over the years to fund this work. Seriously, thank you so much. Canada, Japan, Norway, Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, you've all been at the forefront to ensuring that gender equality is mainstreamed into the fund's investments and are reaching and empowering women where and when they need it most. These projects are literally life-changing for millions of rural women and girls, but so much more needs to be done. And women can lead the way if we invest in them. That is why I am calling on other leaders and governments to show their leadership this year and really step up and lead and double their support to rural women and IFAD this year and in the next year in our upcoming replenishment. With 1.75 billion, IFAD can double its impact by 2030 and help more rural communities recover from the pandemic and rebuild their lives. This will provide real hope and real change for millions of women living on the edge of hunger and poverty. I want to leave you with a quote that I heard from a famous poet. You may have heard of her, Maya Angelou. She's one of my favorites. And she said, "Each time a woman stands up for herself, without knowing it possibly, without claiming it, she stands up for all women." That really touched me when I heard that. And I hope all the women and men watching will continue to stand up for themselves and stand up for rural women and continue to join and stand up for IFAD as we all advocate for rural women and girls. Thank you so much. Please enjoy the event.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, for those comments. Now, I am very pleased to introduce our panel for today. If you all could turn on your video and we will be bringing you into our conversation. I am pleased to introduce Indaya Belchika. She's the lead technical specialist for gender and social inclusion at IFAD. Ujayani Halim is executive director of the Institute for Motivating Self-Employment. Pamela Kim Kung is Community Mobilization Training and Gender Officer with Canada Cereal Enhancement Program, Climate Resilient Agricultural Livelihoods with the Government of Kenya. And finally, Michelle Kagari is the Global Director of Government Relations and Policy at the One Acre Fund. Welcome to all of you. I'm so pleased to be chatting with all of you today. Ndaya, I want to go to you first for a bit of a scene setter. Why is there an urgency behind investing in rural women?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And first and foremost, again, today is an important day. It's the International Rural Women's Day. So we are here to celebrate their achievement, but also to recognize the continued discrimination that they face. So we have to recognize that today, investing in agriculture is key. And then when we look at the role that agriculture play, not only in terms of the importance of employment, but also the role that it can play for the economy, that's something that has to be noted. For instance, we noted that 63% of the world's poor actually work in agriculture, while the overwhelming majority are smallholder farmer. Then we also realize that economic growth, when promoted through agriculture, is 2 to 3 times more effective at reducing poverty and food security than growth generated through the other sectors. While at this time, this is not necessarily the case whereby the focus is put on agriculture. And then we also see that across the board, we have about 1.7 billion women living in the rural areas that currently do not have the right opportunities. So not only agriculture itself is an important sector that should be focused on, but also the role that it can play in terms of employment, food security, nutrition, sustainability is also key. And then when we look at the way it participates to actually bring the income level higher for all the households, whether it's men and women, it's another areas where we should focus, and then to be sure that women are also contributed and brought into the conversation.
Thank you so much for that. Ujani, I want to go next to you. And in many cases, women are not formally recognized as farmers. As you know, we've mentioned, they can have issues with access to financing, access to land, and they're not formally recognized as such in society. How do we go about addressing this issue?
Thank you very much. First of all, I also take a few seconds to thank the organizers for this opportunity to invite me in this very prestigious discussion and event. So International Day of Rural Women. So solidarity and greetings to all of you. And thank you for this very important question. It indeed is a very, very crucial question for millions of rural women who live in my country and in Asian context. The way, I mean, IMSE, my organization, Institute for Motivating Self-Employment, just to give you a very brief context, we work, I come from a very highly populated country. India, you know, in terms of population is huge, and we work we have 1 million primary members, and 70% of these members are women food producers. And almost 50% of, when we started working with them, most of them, they didn't have access to land and many other facilities. So the point of engagement was basically awareness building, telling them about the entitlements and rights that they have, and then kind of ensuring or facilitating a dialogue with the local authorities. So a kind of policy advocacy could be done for this group of women who are the food producers who are feeding us, to ensure that they don't go bed hungry and they can feed their families as well. And I'm very happy to say that, of course, there are very good policies in place in my country, and there are global policies in place. Probably the challenge is in the implementation. So the implementation, awareness, these things, and wherever there are policy gaps, we make it a point to discuss and to put forward policy recommendations to our policy makers. So we actually organize a number of policy dialogues with the peasant women, as well as with the policymakers, from micro to macro level. That means from grassroots to national level. And we flag these issues, and in doing so, in many cases, we have been able to resolve some of these issues. And there are some other ways of accessing, for example, land, following cooperative models. Or in India, self-help group is a very prominent structure that is there. So these are small groups of women. These are informal community-based groups of women. So we work with these self-help groups, women who are the members of self-help groups, and we empower them. And we we try to help them to be in touch with administration and to access different entitlements. These way also, in a collective way, their bargaining power is increased, and they are able to access partly what they are supposed to have rightfully. I won't say it's 100% success story, but this is a journey which we have started, and this is a journey which will continue in coming years. So basically, there is no shortcut. We need to know about rights. We need to also develop capacity of these women, of the rural women, about on claiming their rights, and to basically to I won't say fight for it, to collectively approach for it. And in most of the cases, we have a lot of success stories, and that gives us inspiration.
Thank you so much. You at One Acre Fund also are focusing on this issue of working with government and ensuring that policies are in place that allow women farmers to thrive and to take advantage of any and all opportunities that they have. Tell us a little bit more about ways that you work with governments in the countries where you are operating to help move policies forward and ensure that women do have access to all of the tools that they need to be successful as farmers.
Thank you, Teresa. Yes, at One Acre, a lot of the approaches are very much aligned to the approaches that Janie mentioned. What I'd add perhaps is that you can't underplay the importance of understanding rural women's farmers' lived realities, and really making the investment to unpack structural as well as practical barriers. Because throughout the agriculture value chain, there'll be multiple barriers that prevent them. Eugenia already talked about land, but also prevent them from accessing financing, prevents them from accessing information on the best farming practices, prevents them from accessing markets, prevents them from accessing quality agriculture inputs. And a lot of these barriers, some of them are obvious and will be, or some of them are more visible and will be captured in policy interventions, but quite a number of them are invisible. And because many rural smallholder farmers are excluded and their lived reality is invisible, these barriers do not see the light of day. So one of the key approaches that we've used to significant success at One Acre Fund is identifying what these are. And for example, we found that one of the barriers to accessing agricultural inputs had to do with distance. The number of agro dealers would be a day's walk away. So very practically, because of all the other activities that rural women are engaged in beyond farming, that would actually have a real negative and disproportionate impact on them. So ensuring that you have interventions, they don't have to be policy interventions, but like practically as development agencies, ensuring like last mile delivery for rural smallholder farmers. The same with agricultural extension services. Sometimes being able to make farming a sustainable livelihood has to do with not having access to the best farming practices when you've got a small piece of land. So really making sure that they have access to these practices. The training is translated to something very practical that they can understand, that they can implement using the tools and methods that are readily available to them. Giving them like very practical ways to prevent post-harvest losses. But one of the big innovations that we have found is with regards to access to financing. And a lot of established financing organizations, one of the challenges is being able to prove your credit worth, and then being able to manage the interest payments, and then the payments are not flexible. So what we did at One Acre Fund is we designed flexible financing where the farming inputs are given to the farmers on credit. There is no interest, so whatever amount they borrow at the beginning, that's what they will pay back at the end. The payment is flexible. You pay whatever you can, whenever you can, provided you pay at the end of the season, and really trying to provide that flexibility. We have proved through our 16 years in existence that this flexibility does have a tangible positive impact. Our repayment rates consistently have been 97, 98%. So it proves that the issue is not that they are not credit worthy, but that you have to design interventions that really respond to what their experiences are.
Wow, that's pretty remarkable. 97, 98% repayment. That's incredible. I would love to go next to Pamela and bring you into conversation, thinking about this aspect of financing and how do we continue to make sure that women are moving beyond just food security and we are ensuring this access to financing so that they can increase their income and have access to commercialization? What other things are required for us to be successful in doing that?
Thank you very much, Teresa. As you know, for example, in Africa and Kenya in particular, 70% of women form the labor force, and that alone disadvantages them. So there is need for a level playing ground to enable women to participate fully in agriculture. We also have a challenge of women youth. They are married, but they are only 19 years old. So according to us, those are youths, but according to them, they're already women. So we need to support them, and that's why the issue of youth comes in very clearly. And as we say, we need to move women beyond food security and nutrition and take them towards market income generation and commercialization. we have a very good support and platform for women where we support them through the e-voucher scheme. Now, e-voucher is what we call the electronic scheme. Now, that is a technology that has helped even women who are not, who have not been to school. They can access inputs, they can access trainings, they can access all support through the e-voucher, through swiping in an agro-dealer shop. Remember when Eka Fund has talked about agro-dealer. We've been having challenges of women accessing inputs because of COVID-19. And it's been a bit of a challenge to them because you need to move. There has been a movement, no movement imposed by the government because of the COVID. So accessing inputs to plant is already a challenge to them, meaning that there'll be food shortage at the end of the season because many of them will not have participated in planting. But this technology has assisted because they can actually access the inputs by contributing 10%, and the government supports by giving them 90%. Now that is a grant, that is not a loan. So we also have women, we facilitate them to build their capacities in terms of developing business plans and access our credit facilities. Sometimes it's very difficult for our ladies in the communities to go to banks, formal financial institutions, because they feel that they are not worthy of walking into a bank or getting bank facilities. However, we also have these small microfinances. We have the SMEs there, and we have table banking, and we have even the rotational table banking where they support one another. So we work on partnerships to legitimize agriculture. We work with very many partners who support in one productivity, research, technologies. We look at, especially at technologies of trying to reduce the workload of women. I mean, if a job planter can be very heavy for a woman who is already burdened with the reproductive work at home, how can we help them so that they can get technologies that will increase yield, but at the same time will lessen their workforce? And we're also looking at leadership. If they can participate in leadership, even through agriculture, through groups, if the groups are enabled to work together and access credit facilities as a group, not as an individual, then again, that is what we are doing as a government, and we are really supporting women to participate in leadership activities, even just at that level. And remember, we have groups at levels. Not all women are disempowered, and not all women are empowered. So we are working to support the disempowered women through using even the empowerment web tools, where we look at the empowerment in terms of income, in terms of production, in terms of leadership, and in terms of income, and in terms of decision making. So we support them through training. And we do quite a lot to harness these skills. Women really have skills. And one other area that we are looking at is even dealing with climate resilience. Climate change has really impacted on them. So we are trying to support them so that they can overcome this through drought-resistant crops, and at the same time using the county climate change fund, which we are supporting with. So the government has replicated the e-voucher platform because it is where money does not change hands. It is paper money. I mean, like, you do transactions online and you receive inputs and you plant. So we are also supporting them so that they can access what we call the G-Hub markets, where they do online marketing. So we have partners who support on that. And I'll be glad to expound on partnership that is supporting us on online platforms to support markets and to support post-harvest losses. We support them actually to deal with post-harvest losses through measurement of moistures, through storage facilities. I'll be glad to expand more if there are questions, and over to you. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Pamela, I think you've reminded us of sort of two major factors that it's difficult for any of us to forget these days. One, of course, being we're in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, and two is climate change, which is an issue that is impacting farmers all over the globe, regardless of what region of the world a farmer may be in. Ndaya, how is IFAD working to ensure the financing mechanisms are reaching women and meeting their needs, particularly as we think about the context of both COVID-19 and climate change?
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. We have seen from the conversation with our colleagues that a couple of things. One, that reaching women is not sufficient. So the outreach per se only tells one side of the story. Similarly, when we only look at economic empowerment, it also looked at one side of the story. We have also heard, and then we have seen that when we talk about gender equality and women's empowerment, we are looking at more than just addressing one side of the story. We have to look at deep-rooted situational social norms that perpetuates inequality. And why is this important? This is important because if there is no sustainability, if there is a shock like we have now with the pandemic, then we see how the gains that we may have had for some times are now reversed. And that is the situation that we see globally, whether it's the global north or the global south. So that is in the societies where gender equality is being achieved for some times, the local institutions, they've been able to actually fend for themselves. And then there are some challenges, but they're able to respond. And in others where the support provided or the institutions are relatively new, that's where we have seen some challenges. So IFAD has responded to the global challenges in a couple of ways. One is that IFAD, because of the size of its program, and just let me remind you that IFAD has been in business for more than 40 years now. Since its inception, it has reached 500 million people, and then it's reached 500 million people, and then through more than 1,000 programs. And then every year, IFAD reaches 15 million smallholder farmers, increase the production of 15 million, increase the value of 18 million, and increase the income of 20 million smallholder farmers, 50 of which are women. So there is a lot of things that are done on a regular basis, but when challenges or shock hits, that's when we have to be flexible. And so IFAD has done one thing in particular. It has enabled the project to repurpose some of its financing in collaboration with the government, because as you know, IFAD is the only global development organization exclusively dedicated to transforming the agriculture. And in such a way, it partners with the governments, in particular the Ministry of Agriculture. So it's important that we collaborate with the government and that actually we respond to their needs, which we do. So with the program that we currently finance, we are able to repurpose some of these activities so that they can respond to their priorities. An example would be, for instance, if we look at one project in Cambodia, the project has repurposed some of these activities. So now the farmers can actually receive extension training, as well as support for inputs, because the projects or the measures imposed by COVID-19 have reduced some of those markets and reduced incomes, and therefore farmers have limited income to actually purchase the inputs, which would jeopardize the next growing seasons. Another thing that was done through the same project in Cambodia is now that they created mobile vegetable markets. In doing so, they can actually move around and then continue to earn income without being constrained by some of the measures. The second initiative is that IFAD created the Rural Stimulus Port Facility. And that is important because it enabled, and it's called on the contribution of the global community to mobilize additional financial resources to actually respond to the needs of those countries. So if you will, it's to respond in in the midway between an emergency response while preparing the ground to not lose the gains from the development efforts, and then to capitalize on what is being on the ground, and then to continue to mobilize additional financing. As an example, we have an example in the case of Madagascar, for instance, whereby additional funds have been mobilized because, again, the measures imposed by COVID has created some shortfall in terms of the food supplies as well as input supplies, as well as a decline in information for all the farmers. So additional resources have been provided to government, so to the government of Madagascar. So not only they can provide digital platforms to improve the communications within the Ministry of Agriculture, so that particular investment would enable to scale up the messages across the rural communities. Income is also provided so that they can, income is being provided so they can also generate income and buy the inputs required for the next agricultural seasons. And then they can also continue to plant for the current crop season, so then they do not lose income. And then the third thing is that they are increasing receiving market information, so they can communicate and connect with the other value chains within Madagascar, so that they are sure not to lose on the potential sales as they would have gained if they were not restricted by the measures of COVID. So there were 3 actions that were there to strengthen market access, to promote communication within the broader range of the rural communities, as well as to increase income so that they can secure inputs to not jeopardize the next agricultural season. So those would be some of the 2 initiatives that IFAD has significantly invested on. Over to you.
Thanks so much. And I think that's a great reminder as well of how fickle farming can be, right? You have all of these things that are out of control of a particular farmer in a particular region of the world that can vastly impact their ability to be successful and to gain a living from what they're doing. Obviously, COVID-19 out of control of any of us, as well as climate change. And I think having those flexible financing mechanisms really is key, because it allows people to have that ability on the ground to actually address the money to where it's needed in the moment that it's needed. I'd love to go now to our first poll of the session. If we can bring that up on the screen, feel free to put your choice in, and we'll come back and see the results of that in a moment. And in the meantime, we've got a question that's come in for Ujani. More and more rural women do not attend school. What are rural women's aspirations to be self-sufficient financially and generate wealth for future generations? What role does education play in this? Oh, I think you might still be muted.
Yes. Okay. Can
you? There you go.
Okay, just a second. Right. Sorry for this technical glitches. Yeah, I think it's a very important question, and it's very integral in part when we talk about women empowerment. When we talk about rural, making rural women's voice heard, then education is something very basic. And as an organization, we do work on education as well. Our idea of making rural women's voice heard or empowerment is very holistic, where we cannot basically compartmentalize economic empowerment, social empowerment, and other empowerment. So as these are all interlinked. So basically we have seen, and it's a proven fact, when women become more empowered, when they have the decision-making power, then they do send their children to school. And that includes girl child. I mean, there is a kind of, we do have a patriarchal system, which is dominant. And at least I can talk about my country, and I believe it is pretty similar with other countries as well, where girl children, disadvantaged compared to male children, boys. Girls are disadvantaged compared to boys. So I mean, one of the indicators of the families of or women empowerment is also when girls are going to school regularly, when school dropouts the rate of school dropouts of girl children reducing significantly. So when we try to understand rural empowerment of rural women, basically we do not look at rural women separately from their households. So they are part of their households, and so that when they are empowered, they also empower their households. Yes, education, not only formal education, but we also put equal emphasis on informal education. That could be different ways of developing capacity of women who, I mean, even adult women who probably did not have opportunity to go to schools, semi-literate, not so literate, even illiterate. So we have kind of grassroots level schools where trainings are provided. Adult education programs are also there. Night schools are also there. Through these, we try to develop the capacity of women, because we're talking about the credit linkages. We're talking about market linkages. It's absolutely crucial, important for women to be literate, to understand, to in order to control the process, in order to assert their voices in the decision making, in order to bargain better, they should have basic education, which remains a challenge. But for the next generation, this challenge is reducing. And if you look at data, concrete data in the Indian context, of course, now the education rate is much higher than before. But at the same time, probably taking this opportunity, I just want to focus on two things. There is a feminization of agriculture that is happening. You are aware that rural-urban migration is a reality. Many people are leaving rural areas and moving to the urban areas. So urban poverty is increasing, and in women, when majority of the women, so in this rural-urban migration, more men are migrating from rural areas to cities, leaving their families back in the rural areas, and these families basically are taken. I mean, the women are supposed to take care of these families. So now this feminization of agriculture, we need to look at it. So the role of women become much more prominent, and it sometimes could be also considered as a double burden for them. They work at home, they work outside home, with all these new opportunities unfolding before them. So the other thing which probably needs to we need to look into, how to reduce and the workload of women, how to kind of bring in a kind of sharing the load of the inside the households. From that perspective, we have done some work on women's role inside the households, in care work, in and also in other types of work, basically unpaid work that we call it, and how these workload could also be shared by men. So it is not only about women when we talk about women empowerment, when we talk about rural women's voice. So to enable rural women thrive more, we also need to see how their workload could be shared. And at the same time, another concern is the attitude of youth. I mean, when our country is also moving forward, and this migration is happening, there are surveys and data that youth not all youths are very much keen to stay back in rural areas and to do agriculture. So from that perspective, what our government is doing, and organizations, institutions like IFA is also supporting, to promote smart villages and smart agriculture. So smart villages and smart agriculture incorporate the essence of food sovereignty. So there we talk about climate resilient agriculture, because we need to think about our ongoing climate change. The state I come from in India, we had a super cyclone Amphan together with COVID-19 challenges. So it was like double kind of, disaster at once, and millions got affected. So how can we make agriculture attractive, not only, attractive and of course much more remunerative, so youth also find it's attractive, and they stay back, not because they have to stay back, they become interested. So that is another focus of our work, to engage with youth, and making agriculture an attractive profession. It's a smart agriculture, attractive profession, so they also stay back. And I think that is a global phenomena, and that's happening, and it needs much more discussion and dialogue. I just want to mention very briefly that IFAD in my country also directly supporting civil societies in Asia. Basically, there are some dedicated grants of IFAD for farmers organizations, and we are part of that grants. And using these grants, we have been able to develop capacities of small scale food producers, basically, particularly women and youth. So they can dream bigger, and then they can actually achieve their dreams. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Ndaya, you had something you wanted to add to that?
Yes. It will not be surprising that from our perspective, of course, is the lack of investment in agriculture that is one of the key challenges, but also the importance of small farms. Because if we truly want to address the challenges, as Sabrina mentioned at the beginning of her introduction, related to the increase level of poverty, the increased hunger, and then some of the other panelists mentioned with the youth unemployment and so forth. So then we have to realize that prosperous small farms are key for a number of reasons. One, they would provide food, and then we are not talking about any kind of food, but we are talking about healthy and nutritious food for everyone within the households. It's also a source of jobs. And then when we talk about the jobs, we talk about farm jobs as well as non-farm jobs. And it also increased the demand of locally produced goods. So when we look at investing in rural communities, we are looking at investing and looking at it from the perspective of the household themselves. Because at the end of the day, they are the one making up the populations or the people living in those rural communities. And if you remembered, if we say that 63% of the world poor live in rural communities, so therefore, and most of them are small farmers, so it's a no-brainer that is very key to invest in rural economies, rural communities, for them to be prosperous, to focus on the households, and when we do so, to also do so in an inclusive manner. What do we mean by that? Very briefly, is to realize that in the rural areas, we do have different type of households that do intersect. We have women-headed household, we have youth-headed household, we have person with disabilities, we do have indigenous peoples, and we also have many more vulnerable groups. And then those vulnerable groups, as well as the poor and the poorest, are important to keep in mind, because as soon as there is a shock like the one we are living through today, they are the most vulnerable to step backward. And then it takes time to go and continue to gain back, and then to be at the place where they were before the shock hits. So not only it's important to invest in the rural communities for today's gains, but we also have to look at the future generation. And we only have 10 years to the 2030 agenda. So if we do not make those investments today, for today's household, if we look at the regular age, or if we don't make a distinction between the young and the poor, we also have to make an investment, as was mentioned before, in the youth generation, because those young people, men and women, would be the one that would be there in the next generation. And if we want to talk about sustainability, then it's important to start investing today, so that we have sustainability in the future. And then for that, we have to rally, continue to work together, and more investment is required in the areas of agriculture and rural development. Over to you.
Yeah, I think the point that you raised about resilience is key, isn't it? I mean, we're seeing the necessity of that even more than ever now. And, how do you go about preparing for shocks that no one could have foreseen, and making sure that people have the tools at their disposal to properly respond to those things? I'll have the results of the first poll pulled up now so we can see what you all were thinking. Oh, it's really close, very evenly split. That's very interesting. Looks like lots of different opinions on what the biggest challenges are. Michelle, we've got a question for you. First of all, I'd love your thoughts on that poll, and which one you think is the thing that we ought to be paying the most attention to. And someone also wanted to know, when you were speaking before, you mentioned that the groups that you work with don't charge interest for loans taken out by members. How do these groups then manage their administrative costs?
Thank you, Teresa. I don't know if my response to the poll will be helpful, because I think that all three are contributing factors. So all three are correct. Agriculture systems are very complex. So you can't say that it's only one particular reason. There'll be multiple contributing factors that cumulatively result in a disproportionately negative impact to rural women farmers. With regards to the loan system, so One Acre Fund, we are a non-profit social enterprise. So we operate like a business, but we are not making profit. And the way what we do is we provide a complete service bundle that's intended to respond to the barriers that smallholder farmers face, which we found was access to high quality farming inputs, access to financing, the knowledge to maximize their yield and minimize post-harvest losses, and access to markets. So with regards to the financing model, we use group liability first and foremost. So our farmers will self-organize, our farmers registered with our scheme will self-organize into groups of about 10. And what the financing is that we don't give them the cash. So we have our farming, we have the products and catalog, which they'll choose just like any marketing. And the amounts come with the fee, the cost of the inputs. And the cost that we charge is the market cost, because we don't want to undercut the agriculture sector or agro dealers or agribusiness. And then because we provide a full service model, we deliver last mile delivery. We have community-based agricultural extension officers who walk the journey with our farmers to help them adopt best farming practices. And those fees, or the cost of the last mile delivery, the agricultural extension services, is included in your loan package. Now, what we do is when you're taking the loan or when you're ordering your products, you will know from the outset how much the size of your loan. And we call it a service fee. It's usually about 15 to 20% of the entire loan. They'll know about this upfront. So you'll know if you've taken a loan of $100, that's the average. The average cost of our loans, like in Kenya and in East Africa, tend to be about $100. You will know that at the end, you're paying that $100. The fact that we are non-profit also means that we rely quite a lot on donor funding. And our programs, like in Kenya, we've reached about 78% sustainability, which means the program of providing the inputs to farmers, providing the training to them, that's now self-sustaining. But our salaries, research and development, policy work, all of that is donor funded. And also when we are starting with the donor programs, or we are starting a new program, that the financing that we provide is also donor funded, and we have negotiated preferential lending instruments with a number of banks as well.
Great, thank you so much. We have one final question for Pamela. Given faced by women, especially around access to technology due to barriers brought about by limited capacity and ownership of resources. How are you thinking about addressing such challenges, particularly as it relates to technology?
Let me say that I'm not in 1 acre fund there. That is a clarification. 1 acre fund is Kagiri, I think. Okay, so I mentioned about technology, but remember that we can classify technology at different levels. We are talking about, for example, just access to a smartphone. I know many of our farmers cannot even access a smartphone to do what we call smart agriculture, but we support them with inputs, and when they harvest, they get the income. We've had testimonies of women who say they actually used part of the income to purchase a smartphone. And in that case, that smartphone can help them even pay their contribution. So technology, therefore, is at various levels. We are talking about farming technologies where the women receive trainings and the extension officers train them. In most cases, the training or a capacity building that's given is used in local language, and they're able to understand even just the spacing of the crops, the planting, the intercrop, and so on. So they are able to use that kind of knowledge. And remember, we also incorporating traditional aspects of farming, because these are our smallholder farmers. They are not commercial farmers, they are not big farmers. So they are grappling with the food security, but as we support them, they tend towards, they move towards markets, and then eventually when they get a lot, they'll be able to do what we call commercial farming. But at the same time, we have a very good component called the financial services. Now, when the farmers get the electronic platform, the electronic card to access inputs, this makes them credit worthy. And in that case, they're able to walk to a bank, or rather, we have banks that we are partnering with, 2 of them at this point, who have been supporting farmers. Now, those banks are able to give the women credits based on that, because they are credit worthy, they are receiving inputs, they have been supported by government, they are known. The government even waivers KRA payments, because they cannot even afford, Kenya Revenue Authority, for example, they cannot pay taxes. So they are given that leeway not to pay taxes, given that they own small farms. So they're able, therefore, to access facilities. Even when it comes to use of pesticides, when they are trained, the trainings are based on simple and very useful and easy to understand technologies of how to keep away pesticides from the grains. They are given storage facilities, they are given storage bags that are technologically made in such a way that they preserve pesticides and weeds. They cannot go at a loss. They cannot lose their harvest. So the storage of the facility, the storage bags are meant to support them to store some for food. Remember, we're also focusing on nutrition aspect. So they focus on consumption and nutrition. At the same time, they want to sell the surplus. So the surplus is supposed to supplement areas of school fees for their children, food, uniform and books. And at the same time, they have something to eat. So that is what it means. The technology is not just that big picture, but we are looking at technologies as simple as grain storage, which they can easily identify with. But we're also looking at the issue of challenges like land ownership, resources. Much as we are saying that women are participating in agriculture, do they own land? Are they able to make decisions on that land? So we built their capacities. Our farmers, for example, the ones we are supporting, apply to join a program. And in that application, they indicate whether they are the owners of the land or it is a spousal land. And in most cases, the capacity building is based on letting them appreciate each other in the family. The household is meant to go through this with the other members of the household. So it is not an individual decision. So when finally they decide to plant a certain crop, remember, for example, in Kenya, we have what we call female crop, legumes and sorghum. Those are female crops according to our men here. The bigger crop that brings in a lot of income is for the men. So those decisions are made at household level, and this we inject capacity building. I can see you're switching, you're going off. So the challenges are, sorry about that. So you are getting what I mean, that technology should not really be a barrier, because we are introducing user-friendly technologies that will support these women to handle their, I mentioned, to reduce their workloads, but at the same time increase the yield so that they are able to sell, get income, and even get support to do the labor. Yeah, over to you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Pamela. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. We are now going to bring in an additional guest for some closing remarks. I'm pleased to introduce Nicoline De Haan, who is the director of the new CGIAR platform. Thank you, Nicoline, for joining us today, for listening in on this conversation. I'd love to hear some of your on the speakers' thoughts that we just heard, and what are some of your biggest takeaways from the conversation that we've had?
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, everyone. A wonderful conversation, a lot of different thoughts. And as a researcher, I was sitting here scribbling away, trying to figure out how do I actually frame it? Because as a researcher, you're always trying to figure out how to frame part of the conversation. And what really struck me was something that Daya said was about, we shouldn't lose ground. And I think that's very important. How do we build what we have and build it better forward? I think what we also need to be realistic about is that in most of these cases, I do want to give a shout out to rural women. I mean, they are amazing. I mean, they are often seen as, what I was recently reading, shock absorbers. They absorb a lot of the shocks that we have to deal with. And so combining that together with the food systems that we have, I think is very important. So if you frame it in a little bit bigger form, you have SDG 2, which is food, zero hunger, basically. And then you have SDG 5. How do we work those two together? Now, if you look at SDG 2, we want to build, and especially the platform I work for, the CGIAR Agenda Platform, we want to build a system where gender equality drives some of that transformation. So how do we create systems that women want? How do we develop that? But at the same time, how do we make sure that that food system actually empowers women? And we have a lot of different areas of research on that. How do we actually empower women in that? And so I came up with another 5 things, bringing up with what everybody has been saying. Whereas the first one is resources. We all know agriculture is important, and agriculture has one of those real close connections with resources, and women being able to access those resources or not. So how do we work with that? I mean, if you look at something where I worked a lot on livestock, it's something, a goat is something a woman can take when she gets divorced. A goat is something a woman can have without a title deed, but she can build it. You give her better vaccines, she can build it. She can get more goats. She can move from goats to a cow. So that's a very important part of agriculture. It's something people can build. So that's one thing, resources, the assets. Then the other one, which I think is important, which we don't talk about enough, is decision-making, giving women more decision-making. What hit me with COVID was that a lot of decisions were being made, especially about schooling and stuff, actually closing schools, were made by men. So we need to put women more upfront in decision-making, and like I say, to develop those systems they want so that they can influence them once we get them shocks. And the third thing I want to talk about is capabilities. I think this is so important. We can give a woman a pump, but if she doesn't have the capabilities of using that pump, i.e. understands the policy, i.e. knows how to get fuel, i.e. actually has access to land and the water to use that pump, it still doesn't help. So understanding that whole package of how do you actually give the capabilities to a woman to actually use what she wants for her idea, for her empowerment or whatever. So I think that's very important too. And then number 4 is partnerships. I think that we underestimate the role of partnerships, and especially the idea of men in all of this. We need to partnership more with men. But we also need a partnership with urban areas. A lot of decisions, policy get made in urban areas about rural women. Again, how do we reduce that gap? And then the last one I do want to say is changing systems. Like I said, we need to change our food systems and we need to put women in it. But one of the group we also need to change is people in agriculture. Agriculture is often seen quite traditional in the way it looks. So we need to change some of the norms and understanding. And part of that is what I do is bring out a lot of the evidence, the research. How do we actually show what some of these things, how women are a part of this, what we've been often talking about, invisible group? How do we make them more visible? How do we make their voice heard in the way they want? So these were some of the thoughts as coming out of all this discussion, which I think everybody touched on at some level. I think is very important. And I really appreciate everybody's inputs. And like I say, still a shout out to rural women. I mean, they are amazing. Thanks.
So much, Nicoline, for those wrap-up thoughts. I really appreciate that. I think that's a great way on which to end our sort of framing it ahead. Thank you so much to all of our speakers for joining us and to you audience as well. I apologize for technical difficulties with this video. We will be including the link to the video along with the recording of today's event, just in case you watch it again or share it with colleagues. We also invite you to next event co-hosted by DevX and EFAD that will take place on November 12th, 9 a.m. Eastern time, far on the front getting finance to the small scale producer who need it most. That'll be the second in a series of 3 events. Thank you again to all of you joining us today, and we hope to see an event in a few weeks.